A new Avenger game just came out, and I'm sure there are tons of people talking about it and reviewing it. And if you know this channel at all, instead of doing that, we look at a way older game of the same franchise, because it's too expensive to buy new games for a video that will get a sad amount of views. And if you don't know that, hey, welcome to the channel. We're Stun Club Soda, and you should just, like and subscribe without even knowing if you'll like the video. All the cool kids are doing it, I promise. But enough of that. If we're not looking at the Marvel Avengers game, what are we looking at? Well, it's called Captain America and the Avengers for the NES, and I'll tell you right now, it's actually a pretty cool game, all things considered, so let's get into it. The game was released in 1981 by Data East for the Nintendo Entertainment System, and that's about all I can say before my brain starts to hurt big time. See, Data East made a game for arcades titled, wait for it, Captain America and the Avengers, and it came out in the exact same year. I shit you not. I don't know what the hell was happening there. And the kicker of it all is that these games don't play the same at all. For all intents and purposes, they are very different games. The arcade Avengers game is a beat 'em up like that X-Men game, or that very weird Simpsons arcade game. Meanwhile, the NES game is, I'll come back to it, because first we have to look at the story. So the crux of the story is that Iron Man and Vision party too hard at the discotheque with Mandarin in the opening cutscene and are taken away to sober up. Then Cap and Hawkeye have to go save them while taking down random villains along the way. You go through these beautiful jungles and post-apocalyptic lands that are supposed to be recognizable cities such as Philly and New York. But I'll give Philly a pass because that's probably how it did look post-Super Bowl, but I don't know about the rest. Anyway, you go around beating up mooks and super baddies until you find Mandarin hanging around the Mount Avenger. This is where it's revealed that Red Skull was the mastermind behind the full-scale destruction and took Vision and Iron Man to space. So of course we head there, but not before this happens. Honestly, how does that even happen? I thought they were taken away to space with him. Even still, did Red Skull not have supervillains on payroll who could deal with the Wasp of all people? At some point, he's just setting himself up for failure, but if we're being honest here, there doesn't seem to be a plan past capturing Iron Man and Vision and going crazy in America. And you might be thinking that maybe I left some things out, but there's not much dialogue in this game. Everything I said is what happened. Funnily enough, the arcade game had more personality and story than this one. Anyway, Cap and Hawkeye go to finish off Red Skull, who powers up into a really jacked dude. I don't remember seeing this in the comics, and it kind of makes me uncomfortable. You beat him, and then the game just kind of ends with the promise of R&R and future ports. Maybe they're talking about that one that just came out. Okay, so now that you have the general gist of the story, it's time to talk about the characters because they really encapsulate the gameplay. Throughout the game, you don't have to rely on just one hero because if you get them together, you can switch them out by pausing. Basically, you're going to have to read the situation, decide who's best to tackle whatever is happening. Hawkeye with his 5-way shooting and Cap with his general athleticism, among other things. And what I mean by the get them together stuff is that there's an overworld map where Cap and Hawkeye start in different places and you have to get them to each other if you want to have both. And with that said, if one of them goes down, they get captured and placed somewhere on the map where you have to save them. Also, there are random events that can happen on the map, but I'll come back to that. I actually like this about the game. It gives a real board game vibe and it's not necessarily making you go anywhere. Well, that's until near the end of the game where you can tell they were ready for you to finish the game. You can make a little detour to pick up the Avengers company jet, and this bad boy lets you pass over stages so you don't have to worry yourself with silly little things like playing the actual level. It really feels like America got ran up on by the villains and you have to deal with them wherever you are. Okay, so what makes the characters different from each other? Starting this off, Cap's abilities are super soldier in nature, of course. He can hold jump to do a 360 flip in the air, and when he wants to stick the landing, holding down allows Cap to land on his shield. This negates hazards, does some damage, and can make some bosses an absolute joke. If he's standing, he'll throw out his shield, which acts as a boomerang and actually hits both ways, iframes willing. He has a dash that can hit people, but I wouldn't recommend it since that usually just results in getting hit in a game where health is very important. Oh, and he can hang from pipes like a monkey. Meanwhile, Hawkeye is a little simpler. He can shoot arrows in different directions. And I think that's it. That might sound bad, but the ranged attacks are super useful and he can effectively trivialize some bosses. Too bad it'll take around 15 minutes anyway to kill a boss. Yeah, well, also, he doesn't have a dash, like, period. So have fun trudging around the levels unless you have Cap to switch to. Wasp is here too, but all she really does is dish out information after every level. The only problem is she kind of just repeats things after a certain point, so you'll be hearing about how to change your characters a lot. Also, technically, she single-handedly saved Iron Man and Vision, so there's that. In addition to all this, Cap and Hawkeye are able to enhance their moves, but that's a little more complex, and I do mean a little. Since this game is from the early 90s and also not in arcades, the game's mechanics are a little bit more complex and a little more hard to figure out. Luckily for me, I remember that most games from a different era had manuals that actually told you about the game. Even luckier for me, I was able to find that full manual online, which explained most of the questions I had, more or less. Throughout the game, you'll find these gems that if you pause the game, you see how much either hero has. These are power stones, and these babies are used to power up your heroes if you couldn't tell by the name. But the kicker is that the game doesn't really tell you how this works, and the manual doesn't fully explain it, so that's what I'm here for. Basically, every 100 stones collected gives you a boost in health and damage, and at 200 you get a boost to your move. Cap shield goes behind you when you fire it off, and Hawkeye adds explosions to his arrows. The power stones cap out at 300, but luckily for us, you have to do this twice since Cap and Hawkeye are two different people. But you can easily spit in the game's face by grinding the very first level of the game. There are 35 power stones here, and you can go through the level 20 times total to be fully upgraded. And that's a hot tip for anyone who wants to play the game, because you will need it for the bosses. Okay, let's talk about the levels. Usually when you ask someone how to beat a level in a platformer, they would most likely say, oddly specific, but you go right until you reach the end of the level. And that's correct for the most part, but in this game, when you reach the end, nothing happens, and that's when the real fun starts. You have to find the key crystal, though the more I look at it, the more it just looks like an orb. And that will allow you to leave these hellish cities and landscapes. And as far as I can tell, it's not randomized, so if you know where they are, you can speedrun this game easy peasy. I was watching someone play this game to get an idea of things, and it took the guy like 15 minutes to do what took me an hour, and I thought I was going at a reasonable pace. Sometimes you have to go into a room to get them, and sometimes it's just out in the open, but for the love of God, do not touch the beams, they will insta-kill you. The level design is actually pretty decent, and they have their own identities. The cities look really fucked up from the attacks, and the warehouse-ish levels feel cold and mechanical, and then there was a level where the sky and water were, piss. I don't really know what that means. Something, the degradation of society? The obstacles provide a lot of the challenge, especially when you're running around the place with no idea where to go. Thankfully, that's what Cap's butt shield is for. There's also times where you get locked into a single screen and have to deal with the onslaught of enemies. It's just the worst, and that's what I think the intended purpose was. It really brings to the forefront how hard it is to deal with multiple people. And speaking of that, remember how I was talking about how moving on the map sometimes had a random event? Yeah, if you have epilepsy, please don't watch this part. Just skip to this time right here. I don't even know if you get epilepsy from this, but just be safe, right? So, you get sucked into a nightmare place for nightmare people. It's truly unnerving. The background is constantly repeating, and there's a constant ticking noise that's almost hypnotizing. Compared to the other levels, it's truly alien. Even now, as I'm making this video, I wonder if it was a glitch or something. It's not Sonic Sound Test creepy, but it's right around there. In the Red Alert, you can go through one or two instances, fighting a group of people which sucks, or fighting Tweedledum and Tweedledee which also sucks. I'm sorry, I meant Dynamite, Napalm, and Fireman. So Dynamite Napalm throws barrels at you, but you just start blowing them up and then he freaks out on you. And by that, I mean he just runs at you until he dies. For Fireman, he is definitely the harder of the two. He jumps, slides, and shoots fire. When he does enough damage, he lights himself on fire and tries to dole out religious justice. And by that, I mean he just runs at you until he dies. And those were just mini bosses, so what about the actual bosses, aka the last thing that I really need to talk about? Well, this game has a total of 5 main bosses, or as the game calls them, boss characters who threaten the American way of life. And that really rolls off the tongue. This exclusive cast contains the Wizard, Ultron, Mandarin, Crossbone, and Red Skull. Sure, that might not seem like a lot, but they more than make up for it in length. The bosses really only have like one pattern with slight variations such as when they fire and stuff. The thing is though, is that they have a lot of health, like an annoying amount. So once you figure out the pattern, you're just mindlessly following that pattern for what feels like an eternity until they die. See any of the bosses, it's all the same in this regard. Like the Ultron fight where he stopped fighting because I had him in a damage loop, I was fighting for so long that the game reverted back to the standard song that plays during levels. It turns into a game of endurance where if you make a mistake, you're dead. If they were just hard, I would have no problem, but it is the most tedious part of the game. For that reason, it is my least favorite part of the game by far. But when it's all said and done, I enjoyed this game a fair amount. Definitely better than the beat 'em up version if you ask me. It had a good amount of variety propped up by the levels, and the difficulty made things interesting, and with the relatively short playtime, it made for a refreshing experience. The music was fine, the sprites were fine, and the dialogue was garbo, so everything was what I was expecting. And try it out, especially if you don't want to spend hundreds of dollars on a new Avenger game. And that's about all I have for this video. What you think of it? If you enjoyed it, leave a like and subscribe, it really helps out a lot. And if there's some other games, maybe some Avengers games that you think we should check out, let us know in the comments. And before you go using your shield as a flying object, have a good day.